Hello, I'm Nalani Brown, the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones, picking up on the short story called The Underdog from Agatha Christie's book, The Adventures of the Christmas Pudding. And where we left off, Detective Hercule Poirot was questioning Lily McGrave, and she admitted she indeed knew of the dead body, and she admitted that she was there. Outside the door of the study, he looked once more at the little square of stained green chiffon which he held in his hand. Amazing, he murmured to himself complacently, the ingenuity of Hercule Poirot. Detective Inspector Miller was not particularly fond of M. Hercule Poirot. He did not belong to that small band of inspectors at the yard who welcomed the little Belgian's cooperation. He was wont to say that Hercule Poirot was much overrated. In this case, he felt pretty sure of himself and greeted Poirot with high good humor in consequence. "Acting for Lady Astwell, are you? Well, you have taken up a mare's nest in that case." "There is, then, no possible doubt about the matter?" Miller winked. "Never was a clearer case, short of catching a murderer, absolutely red-handed." "M. Leverson has made a statement, I understand?" "He had better have kept his mouth shut," said the detective. "He repeats over and over again that he went straight up to his room and never went near his uncle. That's a fool's story on the face of it." "It is certainly against the weight of evidence," murmured Poirot. "How does he strike you, this young M. Leverson?" "Darned young fool." "A weak character, eh?" The inspector nodded. "One would hardly think a young man of that type would have the bowels to commit such a crime." "On the face of it, no," agreed the inspector. "But, bless you, I have come across the same thing many times. Get a weak, dissipated young man into a corner, fill him up with a drop too much to drink, and for a limited amount of time you can turn him into a fire eater. A weak man in a corner is more dangerous than a strong man." "That is true, yes, that is true what you say." Miller unbent a little further. "Of course it is all right with you, M. Poirot," he said. "You get your fees just the same, and naturally you have to make a pretense of examining the evidence to satisfy her ladyship. I can understand all that." "You understand such interesting things," murmured Poirot, and took his leave. His next call was upon the solicitor representing Charles Leverson. Mr. Mayhew was a thin, dry, cautious gentleman. He received Poirot with reserve. Poirot, however, had his own ways of inducing confidence. In 10 minutes' time, the two were talking together amicably. "You will understand," said Poirot. "I am acting in this case solely on behalf of Mr. Leverson. That is Lady Astwell's wish. She is convinced that he is not guilty." "Yes, quite so," said Mr. Mayhew without enthusiasm. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You do not perhaps attach much importance of the opinions of Lady Astwell," he suggested. "She might be just as sure of his guilt tomorrow," said his lawyer dryly. "Her intentions are not evident, certainly," agreed Poirot, "and on the face of the case looks very black against this poor young man." "Sorry. It is a pity he said what he did to the police," said the lawyer. "It will be no good his striking to that story." "Has he stuck to it with you?" inquired Poirot. Mayhew nodded. "It never varies an iota. He repeats it like a parrot." "And that is what destroys your faith with him," mused the other. "Ah, don't deny it," he added quickly, holding up an arresting hand. "I see it only too plainly. In your heart you believe him guilty. But listen now to me. To me, Hercule Poirot. I present to you a case. This young man comes home. He has drunk the cocktail The cocktail, again the cocktail, also without doubt the English whiskey and soda many times. He is full of, what you call it, the courage Dutch, and in that mood he let himself into the house with his latchkey, and he goes with unsteady steps to the tower room. He looks in at the door and sees in the dim light his uncle, apparently bending over the desk. M. Leverson is full, as we have said, of the courage Dutch. He lets himself go. He tells his uncle just what he thinks of him. He defies him. He insults him. And the more his uncle does not answer back, the more he is encouraged to go on, to repeat himself, to say the same thing over and over again, and each time more loudly. But at last, the continued silence of his uncle awakens an apprehension. He goes nearer to him. He lays his hand on his uncle's shoulder, and his uncle's figure crumbles under his touch and sinks into a heap on the ground. He is sobered then, this M. Leverson. The chair falls with a crash, and he bends over Sir Reuben. He realizes what has happened. He looks at his hand covered with something warm and red. He is in panic then. He would give anything on earth to recall the cry which has just sprung from his lips, echoing through the house. Mechanically, he picks up the chair, and he hastens out through the door and listens. He fancies he hears a sound, and immediately, automatically, he pretends to be speaking to his uncle through the open door. The sound is not repeated. He is convinced he has been mistaken in thinking he heard one. Now all is silence. He creeps up to his room, and at once it occurs to him how much better it would be if he pretends to never have been near his uncle that night. So he tells this story. Parsons at the time, remember, has said nothing of what he heard. When he does do so, it is too late for M. Leverson to change. He is stupid and he is obstinate. He sticks to his story. Tell me, monsieur, is that not possible? Yes, said the lawyer. I suppose in the way you put it, that is possible. Poirot rose to his feet. You have the privilege of seeing M. Leverson, he said, to put him the story I have told you and ask him if it is not true. Outside the lawyer's office, Poirot hailed a taxi. 348 Harley Street, he murmured to the driver. Poirot's departure for London had taken Lady Aswell by surprise, for the little man had not made any mention of what he proposed doing. On his return, after an absence of 24 hours, he was informed by Parsons that Lady Aswell would like to see him as soon as possible. Poirot found the lady in her own boudoir. She was lying down on the divan, her head propped up by cushions, and she looked staringly ill and haggard, far more so than she had done on the day Poirot arrived. So you have come back, M. Poirot? I have returned, madame. You went to London? Poirot nodded. You didn't tell me you were going, Lady Aswell sharply said. 1,000 apologies, madame. I am in error. I should have done so. You will do exactly the same, interrupted Lady Aswell with a shrewd touch of humor. Do things first and tell people afterwards. That is your motto, right enough. Perhaps it has also been madame's motto. His eyes twinkled. Now and then, perhaps, admitted the other. What did you go to London for, M. Poirot? You can tell me now, I suppose. I had an interview with the good Inspector Miller, and also with the excellent Mr. Mayhew. Lady Aswell's eyes searched his face. And you think now? She said softly. Poirot's eyes were fixed on her steadily. I think that there is a possibility of Charles Leverson's innocence, he said gravely. Ah, Lady Aswell half sprung up, sending 2 cushions rolling to the ground. I was right then, I was right. I said a possibility, madam, that is all. Something in his tone seemed to strike her. She raised herself on one elbow and regarded him piercingly. Can I do anything? She asked. Yes, he nodded his head. You can tell me, Lady Aswell, why you suspect Owen Trefusis. I have told you, I know, that's all. Unfortunately, that's not enough, said Poirot dryly. Cast your mind back to the fatal evening, madam. Remember each detail, each tiny happening. What did you notice or observe about the secretary? I, Hercule Poirot, tell you there must have been something. Lady Aswell shook her head. I hardly noticed him at all that evening, she said, and I certainly was not thinking of him. Your mind was taken up by something else? Yes. With your husband's animus against Miss Lily McGrave? That's right, said Lily Aswell, nodding her head. You seem to know all about it, M. Poirot. Me, I know everything, declared the little man with an absurdly grandiose air. I am fond of Lily, M. Poirot. You have seen that for yourself. Reuben began kicking up a rumpus about some reference or other of hers. Mind you, I don't say she hadn't cheated about it. She had. But bless you, I have done many worse things than that in my old days. You've got to be up to all sorts of tricks to get around theatrical managers. There is nothing I wouldn't have written or said or done in my time. Lily wanted this job. She put in a lot of slick work, and that was not quite the thing, you know. Men are so stupid about that sort of thing. Lily really might have been a bank clerk absconding with millions for the fuss he made about it. I was terribly worried all the evening because, although I could usually get around Reuben in the end, he was terribly pig-headed at times, poor darling. So, of course, I hadn't time to go noticing secretaries. Not that one does notice Mr. Trefusis much anyways. He's just there, and that's all there is to it. I have noticed that fact about M. Trefusis, said Poirot. His is not a personality that stands forth, that shines, that hits you. Crack. No, said Lady Aswell. He's not like Victor. M. Victor Aswell is, I should say, explosive. That did a splendid word for him, said Lady Aswell. He explodes all over the house, like one of those thingamajig firework things. A somewhat quick temper, I should imagine, suggested Poirot. Oh, he's a perfect devil when roused, said Lady Aswell. But bless you, I'm not afraid of him. I'll bark no bite to Victor. Poirot looked at the ceiling. And you call me nothing about the secretary, and you can tell me nothing about the secretary that evening, he murmured gently. I tell you, M. Poirot, I know. It's intuition. A woman's intuition will not hang a man, said Poirot. And what is more to the point, it will not save a man from being hanged. Lady Aswell, if you sincerely believe that M. Leverson is innocent, and that your suspicions of the secretary are well-founded, will you consent to a little experiment? What kind of experiment? Demanded Lady Aswell suspiciously. Will you permit yourself to be put into a condition of hypnosis? Whatever for? Poirot leaned forward. If I were to tell you, madam, that your intuition is based on certain facts recorded subconsciously, you would probably be skeptical. I will only say then that this experiment I propose may be of great importance to that unfortunate young man, Charles Leverson. Will you not refuse? Who is going to put me into a trance? Demanded Lady Aswell suspiciously. You? A friend of mine, Lady Aswell, arrives, if I'm mistaken not, at this very minute. I hear the wheels of the car outside. And who is he? A Dr. Cazelet of Harley Street. Is he all right? Asked Lady Aswell apprehensively. He is not a quack, madam, and if that is what you mean, you can trust yourself in his hands quite safely. Well, said Lady Aswell with a sigh, I think it's all bunkum, but you can try if you'd like. Nobody's going to say that I stood in your way. 1,000 thanks, madam. Poirot hurried from the room. In a few minutes, he returned, ushering in a cheerful, round-faced little man with spectacles, who was very upsetting to Lady Aswell's conception of what hypnotists should look like. Poirot introduced them. Well, said Lady Aswell good-humoredly, how do we start this tomfoolery? Quite simple, Lady Aswell, quite simple, said the little doctor. Just lean back, so. That's right, that's right. No need to be uneasy. I am not in the least uneasy, said Lady Aswell. I should like to see anyone hypnotizing me against my will. Dr. Cazelet smiled broadly. Yes, but if you consent, it won't be against your will it? He said cheerfully. That's right. Turn off that other light, will you, M. Poirot? Just let yourself go to sleep, Lady Aswell. He shifted his position a little. It's getting late. You're sleepy. Very sleepy. Your eyelids are heavy. They are closing, closing, closing. And soon you will fall asleep. His voice droned on, low, soothing, and monotonous. Presently, he leaned forward and gently lifted Lady Aswell's right eyelid. Then he turned to Poirot, nodding in a satisfied manner. "That's all right," he said in a low voice. "Shall I go ahead?" "If you please." The doctor spoke out sharply and authoritatively. "You are asleep, Lady Aswell, but you hear me, and you can answer my questions." Without stirring or raising an eyelid, the motionless figure on the sofa replied in a low, monotonous voice, "I hear you. I can answer your questions." "Lady Aswell, I want you to go back to the evening on which your husband was murdered. You remember that evening?" "Yes." "You were at the dinner table. Describe to me what you saw and felt." The prone figure stirred a little restlessly. "I am in great distress. I'm worried about Lily." "We know that. Tell us what you saw." "Victor is eating all the salted almonds. He's greedy. Tomorrow I shall tell Parsons not to put the dish on that side of the table." "Go on, Lady Aswell." "Reuben is in a bad humor tonight. I do not think it's altogether about Lily. It is something to do with business. Victor looks at him in a queer way." "Tell us about Mr. Trefusis, Lady Aswell." "His left shirt cuff is frayed. He puts a lot of grease on his hair. I wish men didn't. It ruins the covers in the drawing room." Cazalet looked at Poirot. The other made a motion with his head. "It is after dinner, Lady Aswell, and you are having coffee. Describe the scene to me." "The coffee is good tonight. It varies. Cook is very unreliable over her coffee. Lily keeps looking out the window. I don't know why. Now Reuben comes into the room. He is in one of his worst moods tonight and bursts out into a perfect flood of abuse to poor Mr. Trefusis. Mr. Trefusis has his hand round the paper knife, the big one with the sharp blade like a knife. How hard is he grasping it? His knuckles are quite white. Look, he has dug it so hard into the table that the point snaps. He holds it just as you would hold a dagger you were going to stick into someone. There, they have gone out together now. Lily has got her green evening dress on. She looks so pretty and green, just like a lily. I must have the covers cleaned next week." "Just a minute, Lady Aswell." The doctor leaned across to Poirot. "We have got it, I think," he murmured. "That action with the paper knife, that's what convinced her that the secretary did the thing. Let us go on to the tower room now." The doctor nodded. He began once more to question Lady Aswell in his high, decisive voice. "It is later in the evening. You are in the tower room with your husband. You and he have a terrible scene together, have you not?" Again the figure stirred uneasily. "Yes, terrible, terrible. We said dreadful things, both of us." "Never mind that now. You can see the room clearly. The curtains were drawn and the lights were on. Not the middle light, only the desk light. You are leaving your husband now. You are saying good night to him." "No, I was too angry." "It is the last time you will see him. Very soon he will be murdered. Do you know who murdered him, Lady Aswell?" "Yes, Mr. Trefusis." "Why do you say that?" "Because of the bulge in the curtain." "There was a bulge in the curtain?" "Yes." "You saw it?" "Yes, I almost touched it." "There was a man concealed there, Mr. Trefusis?" "Yes." "How do you know?" For the first time, the monotonous answering voice hesitated and lost confidence. Because of the paper knife." Poirot and the doctor again interchanged swift glances. "I don't understand you, Lady Aswell. There was a bulge in the curtain, you say? Someone concealed there? You didn't see that person?" "No." "You thought it was Mr. Trefusis because of the way he held the paper knife earlier?" "Yes." "But Mr. Trefusis had gone to bed, had he not?" Yes, that's right. He had gone away to his room, so he couldn't have been behind the curtain in the window. No, of course not. He wasn't there." He had a sigh. He had said goodnight to your husband some time before, hadn't he? Yes. And you didn't see him again? No. She was stirring now, throwing herself about, moaning faintly. She is coming out, said the doctor. Well, I think we have gotten all we can, eh? Poirot nodded. The doctor leaned over Lady Aswell. You are waking, he murmured softly. You are waking now. In another minute you will open your eyes. The two men waited, and presently Lady Aswell sat upright and stared at them both. Have I been taking a nap? That's it, Lady Aswell, just a little sleep, said the doctor. She looked at him. Some of your hocus pocus, eh? You don't feel any worse, I hope, he asked. Lady Aswell yawned. I feel rather tired and done up. The doctor rose. I will ask them to send you up some coffee, he said, and we will leave you for the present. Did I say anything? Lady Aswell called after them as they reached the door. Poirot smiled back at her. Nothing of great importance, madame. You informed us that the drawing-room covers needed cleaning. So they do, said Lady Aswell. You needn't have put me into a trance to get me to tell you that, she laughed, good-humoredly. Anything more? Do you remember M. Trefusis picking up a paper knife in the drawing-room that night? Asked Poirot. I don't know, I'm sure, said Lady Aswell. He may have done so. Does a bulge in the curtain convey anything to you? Lady Aswell frowned. I seem to remember, she said lowly. No, it's gone. And yet, do not distress yourself, Lady Aswell, said Poirot quickly. It is of no importance whatsoever. The doctor went with Poirot to the latter's room. Well, said Cazalet, I think this explains things pretty clearly. No doubt when Sir Reuben was dressing down the secretary, the latter grabbed tight hold on a paper knife and had to exercise a good deal of self-control to prevent himself answering back. Lady Aswell's conscious mind was wholly taken up with the problem of Lily McGrave, but her subconscious mind noticed and misconstrued the action. It implanted in her firm conviction that Trefusis murdered Sir Reuben. Now we have come to the bulge in the curtain. That is interesting. I take it from what you have told me of the tower room that the desk was right in the window. Are there curtains across the window, of course? Yes, black velvet curtains. And there is room in the embrasure of the window for anyone to remain concealed behind them? There would be just room, I think. Then there seems at least a possibility, said the doctor slowly, that someone was concealed in the room. But if so, it could not be the secretary, since they both saw him leave the room. It could not be Victor Aswell, for Trefusis met him going out, and it could not be Lily McGrave. Whoever it must have been concealed there before Sir Reuben entered the room that evening. You have told me pretty well how the land lies. Now how about Captain Naylor? Could it have been him who was concealed there? It was always possible, admitted Poirot. He certainly dined at the hotel, but now soon he went out afterwards. It is difficult to fit exactly. He returned about 12:30. Then it might have been he, said the doctor, and if so, he committed the crime. He had the motive, and there was a weapon near at hand. You don't seem satisfied with the idea, though. Me, I have other ideas, confessed Poirot. Tell me now, doctor, supposing for 1 minute that Lady Aswell herself had committed this crime, would she necessarily betray the fact in hypnotic state? The doctor whistled. So that's what you're getting at. Lady Aswell is the criminal, eh? Of course it is possible. I never thought of it till this minute. She was the last to be with him, and no one saw him alive afterwards. As to your question, I should be inclined to say no. Lady Aswell would go into the hypnotic state with a strong mental reservation to say nothing of her own part in the crime. She would answer my questions truthfully, but she would be dumb on that one point. Yet I should hardly have expected her to be so insistent on Mr. Trefusis's guilt. I comprehend, said Poirot, but I have not said that I believe Lady Aswell to be the criminal. It is a suggestion, that's all. It is an interesting case, said the doctor after a minute or two. Granting Charles Leverson is innocent, there are so many possibilities. Humphrey Naylor, Lady Aswell, and even Lily McGrave. There is another you have not mentioned, said Poirot quietly. Victor Astwell. According to his own story, he sat in his room with the door open, waiting for Charles Leverson's return. But we have only his words before it, you comprehend? He is a bad-tempered fellow, isn't he? Asked the doctor. The one you told me about? That is so, agreed Poirot. The doctor rose to his feet. Well, I must be getting back to town. You will let me know of how things shape, won't you? After the doctor had left, Poirot pulled the bell for George. A cup of tea, George. My nerves are much disturbed. Certainly, sir, said George. I will prepare it immediately. 10 minutes later, he brought a steaming cup to his master. Poirot inhaled the noxious fumes with pleasure. As he sipped it, he read aloud. The chase is different all over the world. To catch the fox, you ride hard with dogs. You shout. You run. It is a matter of speed. I have not shot the stag myself, but I understand that to do so, you crawl for many long, long hours upon your stomach. My friend Hastings has recounted the affair to me. Our method here, my good George, must be neither of these. Let us reflect upon the household cat. For many long, weary hours he watches the mouse hole. He makes no movement. He betrays no energy. But he does not go away. He sighed and put the empty cup down on its saucer. I told you to pack for 2 days. Tomorrow, my good George, you will go to London and bring down what is necessary for a fortnight. Very good, sir, said George. As usual, he displayed no emotion. The apparently permanent presence of Hercule Poirot at Mon Repos was disappointing to many people. Victor Astwell remonstrated with his sister-in-law about it. It's all very well, Nancy. You don't know what fellows of that kind are like. He has found jolly comfortable quarters here, and he is evidently going to settle down comfortably for about a month, charging you several guineas all day all the while. Lady Astwell's reply was to the effect that she could manage her own affairs without interference. Lily McGrave tried earnestly to conceal her reputation. At the time, she had felt sure that Poirot believed her story. Now she was with not so certain. Poirot did not play an entirely quiescent game. On the 5th day of his sojourn, he brought down a small thumbograph album to dinner. As a method of getting the thumbprints of the household, it seemed a rather clumsy device, yet not perhaps so clumsy as it seemed, since no one could afford to refuse their thumbprints. Only after the little man had retired to bed did Victor Astwell state his views. You see what it means, Nancy. He is out after one of us. Don't be absurd, Victor. Well, what other meaning could that blinking little book have had? And Poirot knows what he's doing, said Lady Astwell complacently, and looked with some meaning at Owen Trefusis. On another occasion, Poirot introduced the game of tracing footprints on a sheet of paper. The following morning, going with his soft, cat-like tread into the library, the detective startled Owen Trefusis, who leapt from his chair as though he had been shot. You must excuse me, M. Poirot, he said primly, but you have us on the jump. Indeed, how is that? Demanded the little man innocently. I will admit, said the secretary, that I thought the case against Charles Leverson was utterly overwhelming. You apparently do not find it so. Poirot was standing looking out the window. He turned suddenly to the door. I shall tell you something, M. Trefusis, in confidence. Yes? Poirot seemed in no hurry to begin. He waited a minute, hesitating. When he did speak, the opening words were coincident with the opening and shutting of the front door. For a man saying something in confidence, he spoke rather loudly, his voice drowning the sound of a footstep in the hall outside. I shall tell you this in confidence, M. Trefusis. There is new evidence. It goes to prove that Charles Leverson entered in the tower room that night. Sir Reuben was already dead. The secretary stared at him. But what evidence? Why have we not heard of it? You will hear, said the little man mysteriously. In the meantime, you and I alone know the secret. He skipped nimbly out of the room and almost collided with Victor Astwell in the hall outside. You have just come in, eh, monsieur? Astwell nodded. Beastly day outside, he said, breathing hard. Cold and blowy. Ah, said Poirot, I shall not promenade myself today. Me, I am like a cat. I sit by the fire and keep myself warm. Indeed, George, he said that evening to the faithful valet, rubbing his hands as he spoke. They are on the tenterbooks. The jump. It is hard, George, to play the game of the cat, the waiting game. But it answers. Yes, it answers wonderfully. Tomorrow we make a further effect. On the following day, Trefusis was obliged to go up to town. He went up by the same train as Victor Aswell. No sooner had they left the house than Poirot was galvanized into a fever of activity. Come, George, let us hurry to work. In the house, the maid should approach these rooms. You must delay her. Speak to her sweet nothings, George, and keep her in the corridor. He went first to the secretary's room and began a thorough search. Not a drawer or shelf was left uninspected. Then he replaced everything hurriedly and declared his quest finished. George, on guard in the doorway, gave way to a deferential cough. If you will excuse me, sir? Yes, my good George. The shoes, sir. The 2 pairs of brown shoes were on the second shelf, and the patent leather ones were on the shelf underneath. In replacing them, you have reversed the order. Ah, marvelous, cried Poirot, holding up his hands. But let us not distress ourselves over that. It is of no importance. I assure you, George, never will M. Trefusis notice such a trifling matter. As you think, said George. It is your business to notice such things, said Poirot, encouragingly as he clapped on the other shoulder. It reflects credit upon you. The valet did not reply, and when, later in the day, the proceeding was repeated in the room of Victor Aswell, he made no comment on the fact that Mr. Aswell's underclothing was not returned to his drawers strictly according to plan. Yet, in the second case at least, events proved the valet to be right and Poirot wrong. Victor Aswell came storming into the drawing room that evening. Now look here, you blasted little Belgian jack-o'-pans. What do you mean by searching my room? What the devil do you think you are going to find there? I won't have it, do you hear? That's what comes of having a ferreting little spy in your house. Poirot's hands spread themselves out eloquently as his words tumbled over the other. He offered 100 apologies, 1,000, 1,000,000. He had been maladroit, officious. He was confused. He had taken an unwarranted liberty. In the end, the infuriated gentleman was forced to subside, still growling. And again that evening, sipping his tea, Poirot murmured to George, "It marches, my good George. Yes, it marches." Friday, observed Hercule Poirot thoughtfully, is my lucky day. Indeed, sir. You are not so superstitious, perhaps, my good George. I prefer not to sit down 13 at a table, sir. I am averse to passing under ladders. I have no superstitions about a Friday. That is well, said Poirot, for see you, today we make our Waterloo. Really, sir? You have such enthusiasm, my good George. You do not even ask what I propose to do. And what is that, sir? Today, George, I make a final thorough search of the tower room. True enough, after breakfast, Poirot, with the permission of Lady Aswell, went to the scene of the crime. There, at various times of the morning, members of the household saw him crawling about on all fours, examining minutely the black velvet curtains and standing on high chairs to examine the picture frames on the wall. Lady Aswell, for the first time, displayed uneasiness. I have to admit it, she said. He is getting on my nerves at last. He has something up his sleeve, and I don't know what it is. And the way he's crawling about on the floor, up there like a dog, makes me downright shivery. What is he looking for? I'd like to know. Lily, my dear, I wish you would go up and see what he's up to now. No, on the whole, I'd rather you stayed with me. Shall I go, Lady Aswell? Asked the secretary, rising from the desk. If you would, Mr. Trefusis. Oh, and Trefusis left the room and mounted the stairs to the tower room. At first glance, he thought the room was empty. There was certainly no sign of Hercule Poirot there. He was just returning to go down again when a sound caught his ears. He then saw the little man halfway down the spiral staircase that led to the bedroom above. He was on his hands and knees. In his left hand was a little pocket lens, and through this he was examining minutely something on the woodwork beside the stair carpet. As the secretary watched him, he uttered a sudden grunt and slipped the lens into his pocket. He then rose to his feet, holding something between his fingers and thumb. At that moment, he became aware of the secretary's presence. Aha! M. Trefusis, I didn't hear you enter. He was in that moment a different man. Triumph and exultation beamed all over his face. Trefusis stared at him in surprise. What is the matter, M. Poirot? You look very pleased. The little man puffed out his chest. Yes, indeed. See you, I have at last found that which I have been looking for from the beginning. I have here between my finger and thumb the one thing necessary to convict a criminal. Then the secretary raised his eyebrows. It was not Charles Leverson? It was not Charles Leverson, said Poirot. Until this moment I thought I knew the criminal. I am not sure of his name, but at last all is clear. He stepped down the stairs and tapped the secretary on the shoulder. I am obliged to go to London immediately. Speak to Lady Aswell for me. Will you request to her that everyone should be assembled in the tower room this evening at 9 o'clock? I shall be there then. I shall reveal the truth. Ah, me, but I am well content. And, breaking into a fantastic little dance, he skipped from the tower room. Trefusis was left staring after him. A few minutes later, Poirot appeared in the library, demanding if anyone could supply him with a little cardboard box. Unfortunately, I have not such a thing with me, he explained, and there is something of great value that is necessary for me to put inside. From one of the drawers in the desk, Trefusis produced a small box, and Poirot professed himself highly delighted with it. He hurried upstairs with his treasure trove, meeting George on the landing. He landed, he handed the box to him. There is something of great importance inside, he explained. Place it, my good George, in the second drawer of my dressing table, beside the jewel case that contains my pearl studs. Very good, sir, said George. Do not break it, said Poirot. Be very careful. Inside that box is something that will hang a criminal. You don't say, said George. Poirot hurried down the stairs again, and seizing his hat, departed from the house at a brisk run. His return was more unostentatious. The faithful George, according to orders, admitted him by the side door. They are all in the tower room? Inquired Poirot. Yes, sir. There was a murmured interchange of a few words, and then Poirot mounted with triumphant step of the victor to that room where the murder had taken place less than a month ago. His eyes swept around the room. There they were, Lady Aswell, Victor Aswell, Lily McGrave, the secretary, and Parsons, the butler. The latter was hovering by the door uncertainly. Good Sir George said I should be needed here, said Parsons, as Poirot made his appearance. I don't know if that is right, sir. Quite right, said Poirot. Remain, I pray of you. He advanced to the middle of the room. This has been a case of great interest, he said in a low, reflective voice. It is interesting because anyone might have murdered Sir Reuben Aswell. Who inherits his money? Charles Leverson and Lady Aswell. Who was with him that last night? Lady Aswell. Who quarreled with him violently? Again, Lady Aswell. What are you talking about? Cried Lady Aswell. I don't understand. But someone else quarreled with Sir Reuben, continued Poirot in a pensive voice. Someone else left him that night, white with rage. Supposing Lady Aswell left her husband alive at 11:45 that night, there would be 10 minutes before Mr. Charles Leverson returned. 10 minutes in which it would be possible for someone from the second floor to steal down and do the deed, and then return to his room again. Victor Aswell sprang up with a cry. What the hell? He stopped, choking with rage. Enraged, Mr. Aswell. You once killed a man in West Africa. I don't believe it, cried Lily McGrave. She came forward, her hands clenched, two bright spots of color in her cheeks. I don't believe it, repeated the girl. She came close to Victor Aswell's side. It's true, Lily, said Aswell, but there are things this man doesn't know. The fellow I killed was a witch doctor who had just massacred 15 children. I considered that I was justified. Lily came up to Poirot. And Poirot, she said earnestly, you are wrong, because a man has a sharp temper, because he breaks out and says all kinds of things. That is not any reason why he should do a murder. I know, I tell you, that Mr. Aswell is incapable of such a thing. Poirot looked at her, a very curious smile on his face. Then he took her hand in his and patted it gently. "You see, mademoiselle," he said gently, "you also have your intuitions. So you believe in Mr. Aswell, do you?" Lily spoke quietly. "Mr. Aswell is a good man," she said, "and he is honest. He had nothing to do with the inside work of the Mapala goldfields. He is good through and through, and I have promised to marry him." Victor Aswell came to her side and took her other hand. "Before God and Poirot," he said, "I didn't kill my brother." "I know you didn't," said Poirot. His eyes swept around the room. "Listen, my friends. In a hypnotic trance, Lady Aswell mentioned having seen a bulge in the curtain that night." Everyone's eyes swept the window. "You mean there was a burglar concealed here?" exclaimed Victor Aswell. "What a splendid solution." "Ah," said Poirot gently, "but it was not that curtain." He wheeled around and pointed to the curtain that masked the little staircase. "Sir Reuben used the bedroom that night, prior to the crime. He breakfasted in bed and had Mr. Trefusis up there to give him instructions. I don't know what it was that Mr. Trefusis left in that bedroom, but there was something. When he said goodnight to Sir Reuben and Lady Aswell, he remembered this thing and ran up the stairs to fetch it. I don't think either the husband or wife noticed him, for they had already begun a violent discussion. They were in the middle of this quarrel when Mr. Trefusis came down the stairs again. The things they were saying to each other were of intimate and personal of a nature that Mr. Trefusis was placed in a very awkward position. It was clear to him that they imagined he had left the room some time ago. Fearing to arouse Sir Reuben's anger against himself, he decided to remain where he was and slip out later. He stayed there behind the curtain, and Lady Aswell left the room. She subconsciously noticed the outline of his form there. When Lady Aswell had left the room, Trefusis tried to steal out unobserved, but Sir Reuben happened to turn his head and became aware of the secretary's presence. Already in a bad temper, Sir Reuben hurled abuse at his secretary and accused him of deliberately eavesdropping and spying. "Monsieur and Madam, I am a student of psychology. Although this case I have looked not for the bad-tempered man or woman, for bad temper is of its own safety valve. He who can bark does not bite. No, I have looked for the good-tempered man, for the man who is patient and self-controlled, for the man who for 9 years has played the part of the underdog. There is no strain so great as that which has endured for years. There is no resentment like that which accumulates slowly. For 9 years, Sir Reuben has bullied and browbeaten his secretary, and for 9 years that means he has endured in silence. But there becomes a day when at last the strain reaches its breaking point. Something snaps. It was so that night. Sir Reuben sat down at his desk again, but the secretary, instead of turning humbly and meekly down to the door, picks up the heavy wooden club and strikes down the man who had bullied him once too often. He turned to Trefusis, who was staring at him as though turned to stone. "It was so simple, your alibi, Mr. Aswell. Mr. Aswell thought you were in your room, but no one saw you go there. You were just stealing out after striking down Sir Reuben when you heard a sound, and you hastened back to cover behind the curtain. You were behind there when Charles Leverson entered the room, and you were there when Lily McGrave came. It was not till long after that you crept up through a silent house to your bedroom. Do you deny it?" Trefusis began to stammer. I never... Ah, let us finish this. For 2 weeks now I have played the comedy. I have showed you the net closing slowly around you, the fingerprints, footprints, the search of your room with the things artistically replaced. I have struck terror into you with all of this. You have lain awake at night fearing and wondering, did you leave a fingerprint in the room or a footprint somewhere? Again and again you have gone over the events of that night, wondering what you have done or left undone, and so I brought to you this day where you made a slip. I saw the fear leap into your eyes today when I picked up something from the stairs where you had stood hidden in the night. When I made a great parade, the little box, entrusting it to George, and I go out." Poirot turned towards the door. "George, I'm here, sir." The valet came forward. "Will you tell these ladies and gentlemen what my instructions were?" "I was to remain concealed in the wardrobe in your room, sir, having placed the cardboard box where you told me to. At 3:30 this afternoon, Sir, Mr. Trefusis entered the room. He went to the drawer and took out the box in question. And in that box, continued Poirot, was a common pin. Me, I always speak the truth. I did pick up something on the stairs this morning. That is your English saying, is it not? See a pin and pick it up. All the day you'll have good luck. Me, I have good luck. I have found the murderer. He turned to the secretary. You see, he said gently, you betrayed yourself. Suddenly, Trefusis broke down. He sank into a chair sobbing, his face buried in his hands. I was mad, he groaned. I was mad, but oh my God, he badgered me and bullied me beyond bearing. For years, I'd hated and loathed him. I knew it, cried Lady Astwell. She sprang forward, her face irradiated with savage triumph. I knew that man had done it. She stood there, savage and triumphant. And you were right, said Poirot. One may call things by different names, but the fact remains. Your intuition, Lady Astwell, proved correct, and I facilitate you. That was the end of the story called The Underdog by Agatha Christie. I am Nalani Brown, the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening while I read.